Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode. I'm Alex, I'm your nurse, and today we're talking about a really important topic, hydration. Specifically, the difference between water and electrolytes, and why drinking more water isn't always the answer. A lot of people are really trying to do the right thing. They're carrying their water bottles or tracking their ounces or making an effort to hydrate more, yet they still feel fatigued or lightheaded or foggy. That's because hydration isn't just about water, it's about balance, and electrolytes play a critical role in that. Today, we're going to break down the basic science of hydration, how it works on a cellular level, why water alone sometimes falls short, and how too much or too little fluid can be a problem, but then also some nursing tips to help support adequate hydration in your body. So, let's dig into some anatomy. Hydration isn't just about how much water you drink, and it can actually cause problems if you drink too much water, which we'll get into in a little bit in the episode a little later. At a physiological level, hydration is about how water moves between compartments in the body, particularly in cells. So, water in the body exists in blood plasma, but it exists inside and outside the cell. So, inside is called intracellular fluid, and outside the cell is called extracellular fluid. So, for hydration to be effective, water has to move into the right places, especially into cells where energy production, nerve signaling, and muscle contraction can occur. And that movement depends on electrolytes. So, all cells want to maintain a certain level of homeostasis or normalcy. So, they want everything to be even and equal throughout the whole environment, whether that be the cell or the organ group or the body as a whole. So, cells have semi-permeable membranes, which means that things can flow in and out, but it's going to depend on the concentration of both fluid and electrolytes on either side of that membrane that determines where they're going. And so this is where electrolytes come into play because they help to pull water and fluid between this membrane, and that's what helps keep the cells stable. So when that level is thrown off, that's when we start to see problems and other conditions or signs and symptoms and side effects occur. So which electrolytes am I talking about and why do they matter? Electrolytes are minerals that carry an electrical charge when they're dissolved in water. And these include sodium, potassium, chloride, magnesium, and calcium. These electrolytes help to regulate a whole bunch of things, including fluid movement across the cell membranes, like we discussed, nerve impulses, muscle contraction, heart rhythm, and blood pressure. Sodium in particular plays a really big role in where the water goes in your body. Water always follows sodium. Without adequate electrolytes, especially sodium, water tends to pass through the body instead of being retained where it's actually needed. And so sodium really helps to regulate that normalcy, that homeostasis that we're talking about. It helps to regulate the distribution of water in the body, where it sits, how it's used, and that's a really key component of hydration. So electrolytes help the body retain water, they direct fluid into the cells, they maintain blood volume, and they support nerve and muscle function. Sodium helps water absorption into the intestines and retention in the bloodstream. Potassium supports intracellular hydration and muscle function. Magnesium plays a role in muscle relaxation and energy metabolism. And when all of these electrolytes are present in the levels that they're supposed to be in the body, hydration becomes more efficient, not just at a higher volume. So I mentioned earlier that drinking too much water can actually be a problem, so we're going to get into that. When you drink plain water, it enters the bloodstream quickly. If there isn't enough sodium present already in the body may actually just excrete that extra water rather than use it and absorb it into the cells and put it to use in other muscle systems or organ systems. This is why people sometimes say, I drink a ton of water, but I still feel dehydrated. Your body didn't have the capacity to actually absorb what you drank and do anything with it because there wasn't enough sodium or potassium or any of the other electrolytes present to help retain it. Symptoms of inadequate electrolyte balance can include frequent urination, lightheadedness, fatigue, muscle cramps, headaches, brain fog, dizziness is a big one as well. This doesn't mean that water alone is bad. It just means that it needs the right mineral context in order to be effective and to be used efficiently by the body. Too little water is going to be dehydration, which we're all pretty familiar with. But true dehydration occurs when fluid loss exceeds the intake. So you have less in your body than it needs to function. And this can happen with illness or heat exposure or excessive sweating, or maybe if you take diuretic medications. These are substances that cause urination, and it's not even just restricted to medications. Alcohol and caffeine are also considered diuretics. So if you're consuming large amounts of those, you may actually not be hydrating the way that you think. You may actually be excreting extra and becoming dehydrated because of what you're taking in. So signs of dehydration can include dark urine. This is because your urine is very concentrated due to the lack of fluid present. Dry mouth. So your oral mucosa and membranes are actually drying out due to the lack of fluid, which makes sense. Fatigue. So your brain and your muscles are both very metabolically expensive, right? So they're going to require a lot of fluid in order to keep functioning. When they don't have enough, particularly electrolytes, which again we'll get into, that when they don't have enough to help keep functioning at their normal level, that's when you're going to start feeling the excessive fatigue or tiredness because your body is needing more and it's not able to function with what it has. Dizziness is along the same lines as fatigue, but if it's severe enough, it could be due to fluid imbalances in the brain. And we'll talk about this in the next one with too much water, but fluid balance in the brain is very, very important because you can get into some really serious side effects or conditions even. It's not a side effect at that point, such as seizures. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. But the fluid balance in the brain is particularly important. So this is why something like dehydration can really get out of hand really quickly if we're not staying on top of it. So dehydration reduces blood volume, it impairs circulation, and it stresses out the cardiovascular system. So again, not enough fluid or electrolytes in order to do anything with the fluid that we have. And so these signs and symptoms come up because it's the body saying, hey, I can't function at my normal level. I'm telling you to give me what I need. Okay. So moving to too much water, overhydration and hyponatremia. So hyponatremia means too low of sodium, and then overhydration would just mean that we have way too much water to the point that we've essentially diluted the amount of sodium that we do have present in our bodies. And so then it turns into similar, being kind of like hyponatremia, in that the amount of sodium that's present is not equivalent or where it should be in those normal levels of homeostasis with the water. And so that's when we'll start seeing these signs and symptoms. So overhydration is less common, but it can be dangerous. Drinking excessive amounts of water without replacing electrolytes can dilute sodium levels in the blood, leading to an imbalance in cells in the bodily systems, as I was just saying. So this occurs in endurance athletes or people that just drink large amounts of water very quickly. Situations with heavy sweating, but all you did was drink water. You didn't replace it with an electrolyte and some sodium or potassium or any of those electrolytes that we discussed. Symptoms can include nausea, headache, confusion, muscle weakness, because again, that sodium and hydration, that water balance is thrown off, and so is the potassium and magnesium. And so since it's so diluted, those electrolytes are not able to go into the muscles and help like fire and make the muscles work in the way that they're supposed to. And then in severe cases, seizures. So this is some of the neurological symptoms that I was talking about with the dizziness and fatigue, but then on the really extreme end, seizures. And this is due to cerebral edema is throwing off the blood-brain barrier, and the levels in your brain are freaking out. So there's too much fluid on the brain, or the levels are just out of balance, and the body is basically saying, like, I am way out of balance. I don't know what to do. And you'll start seizing. That is, again, a very severe case. So this is why hydration advice has shifted away from drink water as much as possible towards balanced hydration. And so we've seen a lot of different electrolyte companies and powders come out, and I think that's really great, but we do want to make sure that we're getting the appropriate levels and amounts of each, because taking in too much of that can also be a problem. So when electrolytes are especially important, they might be most helpful for people who sweat excessively, those exercising regularly, hot or humid environments. And I'm gonna actually take out the humid, just really hot environments. I live in the desert, and it's kind of tricky because people will come out here and visit and they'll hydrate, but your body is releasing the sweat and the sodium and all these other things, and it's just getting dried up and you don't even notice. And it doesn't take very long before you are out or dizzy or fatigued or whatever, because it's absorbed not only the fluid from your sweat, but the sodium and all the potassium and all the other pieces too. So other ways that electrolytes can be helpful, particularly when you're sick, because there might be a lot of fluid that you're excreting from being sick. Low carb or fasting states if you're not taking in enough nutrients. And then people experiencing frequent fatigue or dizziness or poor sleep. These electrolyte supplements can really help with that. And this isn't about needing electrolyte drinks all the time. It's about context of when to drink them and when to apply them to your life. So, my nursing perspective, practical hydration guidance. From a nursing standpoint, good hydration is individualized. Helpful principles include drink consistently throughout the day instead of just taking in mass quantities all at once. We don't want to dump a whole ton of fluid into our body just so we can even out the level that we're taking in, and our body knows what to do with it and it can actually process what it's taking in. Pay attention to your urine color and any thirst cues. So if your urine is getting particularly dark, that's something to pay attention to. Make sure you're taking in enough fluid. Increase how much fluid you're taking in at that point. And that could also arise if you had a particularly salty meal, or maybe you've just been taking in more electrolytes. Your body's just trying to flush it out. Pay attention to dry skin or chapped lips. Chapped lips are actually a sneaky later sign of dehydration. So if you're constantly having to use chapstick, I would recommend adding an electrolyte packet or powder like once a day and see if that maybe helps improve. You don't have to hydrate with just electrolyte powders. So there are so many water-rich and nutrient-rich foods that you can take in, and this includes watermelon or berries or cucumber and lettuce. Start adding these whole foods into your diet, and that's going to help keep you even more hydrated, because a lot of these processed and packaged foods have extra sugar and sodium in them that is going to pull on your fluid levels in your body that you need and make you require more in order to sustain that intake of those higher concentrated foods. Ultimately, don't force excessive water intake. The daily recommended amount is 64 ounces. Balance fluid with your meals when possible, again, throughout the day. This is going to help digestion, but it's also going to help with adequate distribution of fluid and nutrients throughout the body, again, as I said earlier. So, if you're going to be getting into more exercise, or you're getting outside, you're hiking, maybe you've been sick, try an electrolyte powder or supplement and see how it helps you. Shout out to some of my favorites are Element, and I like Jump, Jump. They're pretty good as well. And there are a lot that do sugar-free now for those of us that are on low-carb diets, so you can still get the potassium and the sodium and the magnesium in there in the levels that you need without having to sacrifice on your carbohydrate goal. If you're doing the more intense work, you might want to consider one that's not sugar-free though, because those sugars are actually part of those electrolytes that are going to help with that cellular balance across that permeable membrane. So something to consider. I have included a link below, and she goes through a number of different electrolyte powders, and she does a really good job explaining this one tasted like this was the price point of this is how I felt after it. So she kind of does the test for us. So give that a try. Check it out, see if it helps you. And if you have one that you particularly like, please drop a comment, and I'd love to hear it because I'm always looking out for new ones. I personally just tried Element, and they're my favorite. They do a really great job with the balance of potassium and sodium. It's exactly what you need, and their flavors are perfect. Key takeaways for today. Hydration is about balance, not just water intake. Electrolytes direct where water goes within the body and within the cells. Too little or too much water can cause problems. And balanced hydration supports energy, cognition, and physical performance, and honestly, your mood and your sleep. Hydration isn't about a competition to drink the most water, it's about giving your body what it actually needs in order to function efficiently. Understanding the role of electrolytes helps explain why hydration feels different depending on your activity level, your health, and your environment. So, if this episode helps to clarify hydration and electrolytes for you, please consider liking and subscribing and share it with somebody who could maybe benefit. If you have any questions, please send them my way. I'm always open for recommendations on subjects to talk about. Thank you for listening as always, and I will see you guys next week.